Trump should be held accountable for what he did on January 6th. I also think that every time in the spring that Trump was indicted for something, or we saw the Tish James case and the Alvin Bragg case in New York, every time that was going on, his poll numbers went up. I think that the American public has less than zero faith in the justice system at this point, and that it plays to this everyone's out to get me, the rules are not fair, there's a martyr complex situation. And I think people bristle when they see it, that it appears that the law is influencing politics. And I'm not saying he shouldn't be held accountable, because I actually think that this case is incredibly important and he should. But I think politically, it's bad timing for Democrats because it just relitigates all of that. And I think the pendulum could swing at least a couple of points back towards Trump.
Well, let's get into it and figure out what's going on here. Tom Nichols is the former member of the is a former member of the Republican Party, now a staff writer at The Atlantic. Tom, hello there.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. And Melisa Derosa is former Director of Communications for Andrew Cuomo, the Democrat governor of New York. Hello, Melisa.
Hi there.
Thank you for being with us tonight, both of you. Okay, Tom, just explain to us where we're actually up to with the rules and regulations here and why this microphone appears to be such a big sticking point.
Well, in part, I think you have two things going on. One is that the Harris campaign is kind of trolling Trump to say, if you really want to have microphones on, as you did in the past, and interrupt, we'll have them on. And of course, Trump, who has a kind of adult version of oppositional defiance disorder, immediately says, no, we agreed to microphones off. And even though he says, well, that didn't work out so well the last time. So, in a way, they're kind of shadowboxing each other about this. But I suspect that Trump's people actually would prefer to have the microphones muted, because what he did in the last debate is keep talking. Even though you couldn't hear him, it was distracting to the candidates. You can sort of hear him in the background. He doesn't really stop talking when the microphones are off. So maybe that's what he now prefers. And the Harris folks are, sort of needling him to say, let's renegotiate this.
Well, that's really interesting. Melissa, I sort of was a bit surprised to hear that news, to be honest with you. I kind of thought it might go the opposite direction, that Kamala Harris would want him muted, but clearly they see gain in having him chatting away over her.
Well, no, I think that what was just said is exactly right. I think that strategically speaking, I think that his knee jerk is to always oppose what the other person says that they want. And I do think that in the last debate, he did keep talking and the audience didn't hear it. So the audience didn't have the benefit of hearing whatever, potentially crazy things he was saying, but it did distract Biden. And so his people, I'm sure, do want the microphones cut off. The real question is he just trying to use this to get out of debating her at all and looking for any sort of a sticking point to get out of the current arrangement whatsoever? And if he's going to use this to walk away, in which case I think it would be a huge mistake for him, because I think at this point his campaign needs something to reset. I think that, momentum-wise, Kamala Harris undoubtedly has the ball. The mainstream media is along for the ride, and I don't see anything absent a debate at this point being able to disrupt that momentum, and so he should be careful what he wishes for.
That's interesting, isn't it, Tom? The suggestion that Donald Trump had more to lose out of these debates than Kamala Harris did, but actually that's probably not the case now. They could be very beneficial to him being a part of a debate like that.
Well, they could be beneficial to him if he weren't him, unfortunately. But also, I think at this point, Melissa's point is well taken, that if he pulls out, that looks bad. Americans, they expect if you're going to have a debate and you've agreed to these things that you show up. That pulling out of these things, that worked for him in previous years in primary debates when he'd say, well, I'm not going to debate these other Republicans. But that at this point, with Harris surging and doing well and her approval rating actually rising when she goes out in public, that can only help her. And so I think, it is pretty dangerous here that if he decides to just pull out, her team has been pretty adept at this stuff, and they're already mocking him as a chicken and as a coward. And I think that's the other thing to bear in mind. He is now, I think, genuinely afraid. He wasn't that worried about Joe Biden. He was doing well. He feels like, he had crossed swords with Biden once before in 2020, and even though he lost the election, which he won't accept, but I think there's real fear creeping into him that he can lose, that she will be pretty tough on him, that he has screwed up his vice presidential pick, and that debate's probably not going to go well. So there's a lot of things in play here, but I think if he doesn't show up, that's going to hurt him.
All right. Just on that point, by the way, the Times tonight reporting that Kamala Harris now more likely than Donald Trump to win November's election. That's according to some new polling analysis. Also, a raft of endorsements for Kamala Harris from former staff of the Bushes, of Mitt Romney, and of John McCain as well. So that's clearly quite a key moment tonight for Kamala Harris. Melissa, just on that issue of this being sort of, a help or a hindrance to Donald Trump and his campaign at the moment, I do wonder if what we saw in that debate with Joe Biden was Donald Trump's ability, which we all doubted he had, but clearly he did, to show a level of restraint and to play the room rather than just bulldoze in there, like we've seen him do on countless occasions. And that there is an opportunity. I mean, he did allow Biden the space and the time to make his mistakes. And I wonder if there is a version of the 10th of September where Donald Trump starts to take a different tact against Kamala Harris.
Well, debating Joe Biden, at age 82 is not debating Kamala Harris. And I think that since Kamala Harris was swapped out as the Democratic nominee, what we've seen is a highly undisciplined, flailing Donald Trump. And it has completely been to Kamala Harris's and the Democrat at large advantage. And look, in the last debate, he did show an incredible amount of restraint. And I will say in the weeks following the debate, he was the most disciplined I've ever seen Donald Trump in his entire life, going back to when he was a tabloid guy in the 80s and the 90s. He shut up. He understood that if he stood back, the mainstream media was sort of going to do it, and the Democratic Party was going to do his job for him, which was destroy Joe Biden, to the point where he couldn't run again. This is an entirely different scenario. And since he has been running against her, which ironically, the RNC and Donald Trump had been running ads for weeks in the lead in to sort of this swap out saying, you're not really voting for Joe Biden, you're voting for Kamala Harris, insinuating that Joe Biden wouldn't make it through 4 years because Kamala's numbers were so negative. But all of a sudden, she gets put in the jump seat and her numbers have taken off. And he has not figured out what to do here. I talk to Republicans who are very frustrated that say, if he focused on foreign policy, if he focused on the border, if he focused on inflation and the economy and make her wear and own all of the failures of the Biden administration, we would be in a much different position. But instead, he's focusing on crowd size and on microphones.
Right.
And so, he certainly has not been able to find his way, just generally speaking, in this campaign, let alone a debate strategy. And I think that that's got to be in his head right now, which is why he's sort of feeling out. Maybe I duck and get out of this, maybe not. But to the point that you guys were just talking about, I don't know that Donald Trump's ego can handle a sustained media effort of saying you're scared of a girl, which is where it will go. So it'll be interesting to see where this all ends up in the end. But, I think he's got a lot more to lose by ducking than by going in. Although if he goes in, it could really just be the end of it.
I think I think the candidates and the press have a different expectation about debates than how they really matter in American politics. But nobody really listens that closely for policy debates. Even with Nixon and Kennedy, what really did Nixon in was that, he just looked bad on television, and Jack Kennedy's a handsome guy. The substantive debate, that was probably the last debate where a lot of people listened on radio. But the substantive debates, I think, the substance of debates have never been that much of an issue for most people. They want to see the candidates in an unscripted, spontaneous, head-to-head test that tells them what kind of people they're looking at. The moment in the Carter-Reagan debate wasn't about who's going to annoy the Soviet Union more, or whether Carter's really answering the question, or whether Reagan was really bellicose. It's when Reagan said, "There you go again," which was just another way of saying, "Look, aren't we just tired of this guy?" In the vice presidential debate, when Lloyd Bentsen slaps down Dan Quayle and says, "You're no JFK." Those are the memorable moments. Those are the things that people take away from them. Gerald Ford blundering his way through an answer about how there's no Soviet domination of Europe of Eastern Europe in 1976. So in a sense, debates are a chance to shine in a moment with a good line, but they're mostly a chance to really screw up in front of your opponent. And I actually think that the last one, that the "will you shut up man" moment, I think that hurt Trump more than it hurt Biden, because I think people were just tired of it. It's exhausting to watch Donald Trump, especially if you're not part of his cult of personality. And I think that that's exactly why, as we were all talking about a moment ago, that Trump was so disciplined this year after that first debate.
And Melissa, I suppose Joe Biden felt the power of them a couple of weeks back, didn't he, during that debate where he crumbled? We talk about them perhaps not mattering as much, different relationship to them the candidates in the press have, do the public watch that closely? But a moment like that can be absolutely fatal, as has been proven. Still.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason that Joe Biden was sort of chased off the Democratic ticket had less to do with the 90 minutes of the debate and the public reaction as it did with the political reaction, right? This was Nancy Pelosi and others saying either you get off the ticket or we're going to publicly embarrass you until you get off the ticket. And that was about them looking at their own poll numbers and saying, I'm not going to let the House go down and I'm not going to let the White House go down for your personal politics. So I think that had it just been about the actual debate, I mean, 51 million Americans watched the debate, put that in the context of what the entire country is. And I think that the reality is that it was less about any particular moment, although there was sort of a ridiculous moment where the two of them were arguing about golf that took off on TikTok. But I don't think there was a viral moment in that debate so much as it was 90 minutes that the American public couldn't unsee, which then was seeping into the down ballot races, which the politicians in Washington said, not on my watch.
Okay, interesting. Can I just quickly get your take, both of you, on a story developing tonight? And that this is the Department for Justice, the special counsel there, Jack Smith, has filed a superseding indictment against the former President Donald Trump for his alleged attempts to interfere in the election in 2020, following that loss to Joe Biden. And of course, people will be familiar with this US Supreme Court ruling that stated that presidents are immune from prosecution for certain in-office acts. These new charging documents are tailored to those, tailored their allegations to that ruling. So this is quite significant. Tom, how significant?
Well, it's very significant because, in part, not least because Trump is trying to challenge Jack Smith's authority to prosecute him at all. He's making the same filing that other people who have been charged by special counsels have tried to make, which is this argument that I don't think is going to fly. I don't think it's going to fly in an appeals court. I don't think it's going to fly if and when it gets to the Supreme Court. Although with this Supreme Court, one never knows that the Justice Department has no authority to appoint somebody like Jack Smith. But it does matter because I think Americans, unfortunately, seem to have just kind of erased from their minds, or many of them seem to have erased from their minds, that Donald Trump is not just a typical candidate, that this guy, incited a seditious mob on January 6, 2021, and that he has repeatedly made clear that he has no remorse about trying to affect the 2020 election.
Okay. So
and so I think it matters. I think it matters quite a bit on both of those counts.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm really tight on time here, Melissa. Sorry. So just very, very briefly, Tom talking, I suppose, about both counts there, but vibes. It's clear, reminding the public of something clearly. Legally, is this a clever play by Jack Smith? Does it matter legally?
So listen, I think that this is terrible timing. I take a little bit of a different tact, which is I think that Trump should be held accountable for what he did on January 6th. I also think that every time in the spring that Trump was indicted for something, or we saw the Tish James case and the Alvin Bragg case in New York, every time that was going on, his poll numbers went up. I think that the American public has less than zero faith in the justice system at this point, and that it plays to this everyone's out to get me, the rules are not fair, there's a martyr complex situation. And I think people bristle when they see it, that it appears that the law is influencing politics. And I'm not saying he shouldn't be held accountable, because I actually think that this case is incredibly important and he should. But I think politically, it's bad timing for Democrats because it just relitigates all of that. And I think the pendulum could swing at least a couple of points back towards Trump.
Okay. Nice and brief, thank you. Melisa Derosa, who is former Director of Communications for Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, and Tom Nichols, who is a former member of the Republican Party and now a staff writer at The Atlantic, with us on Times Radio tonight. Thank you both for your company.